A rain-soaked highway, a smoking $200,000 Aston Martin, and a single father with grease under his fingernails who just wanted to get through the worst night of his year. When Garrett pulled over to help a stranded woman in a designer trench coat, he saw everything he despised about the elite class: wealth, impatience, and arrogance. He fixed her engine with bare hands and blunt words, never realizing the woman standing in the mud was Vanessa Adler, the billionaire tech mogul he was scheduled to meet for a blind date 20 minutes later. The hydraulic lift hissed as Garrett Miller lowered the 1974 Chevrolet Chevelle back onto the concrete floor of his shop. He wiped his hands on a rag coated in degreaser, though the dark crescents of embedded oil beneath his fingernails were permanent fixtures. At 34, Garrett had the lean, broad-shouldered build of a man who spent his days wrestling transmissions and lifting cylinder heads, but his eyes carried the distinct, heavy wear of a single father playing defense against the world. "Daddy, Mrs. Higgins said if you aren't out the door by 6, you're going to turn into a pumpkin," 6-year-old Lily announced from the office doorway. She was holding a plastic wrench from her toy set, her brown curls tied back in matching yellow ribbons. Garrett managed a soft smile, dropping his rag onto the workbench. "Mrs. Higgins is exaggerating, Bug. And pumpkins don't drive pickup trucks." He walked over, kneeling to tap the tip of her nose. Leaving Lily on a Saturday night always felt like a minor betrayal, even if Mrs. Higgins lived just 3 doors down in their quiet pocket of Beacon, New York. But Garrett's older sister, Brenna, had spent 3 months orchestrating tonight's intervention, and she had framed it with emotional blackmail he couldn't dodge. "Undo him." You haven't had a conversation with a woman that didn't involve PTA meetings or brake pads since Sarah left 3 years ago. Brenna had barked over the phone that morning. "Her name is Vanessa. She's in logistics software down in Manhattan. She works too hard, her social life is a wasteland, and my colleague Chloe swore you two would balance each other out. Put on the navy blazer, Garrett, the one without the oil burn on the cuff." By 6:15 p.m., Garrett was behind the wheel of his 2018 Ford F-150, heading north on Route 9W toward the Gilded Elm, an overpriced farm-to-table restaurant in Cold Spring. He hated the blazer. He hated the rigid collar of his Oxford shirt. Most of all, he hated the assumption that he needed saving by some corporate climber whose idea of hardship was a delayed flight at JFK. He knew the type. During his previous life as a precision machinist for an aerospace subcontractor in Stamford, before he cashed out his 401k to open his auto restoration shop and fight for primary custody of Lily, he had dealt with plenty of Manhattan executives. They lived by metrics, quarter-end bonuses, and curated aesthetics. They viewed a man with calloused hands and a mortgaged garage as a charming rustic project, until the reality of child support schedules and early morning school drops hit them. Outside, the October sky bruised from charcoal to black, and the heavens opened up. It wasn't a standard autumn drizzle. It was a torrential, blinding Hudson Valley downpour that turned the asphalt into a slick mirror. Garrett dialed his wipers to maximum speed, the rhythmic thump, thump vibrating through the dashboard. He checked the dashboard clock, 6:38 p.m. He was going to be early for a date he wished would be canceled. Then, 2 miles south of the storm drain basin near Storm King Mountain, his headlights caught the frantic flashing of double yellow hazard lights. Pulled half onto the gravel shoulder, tilted precariously toward a drainage ditch, sat a dark gray Aston Martin DB11. White steam was pouring from beneath its clamshell hood, battling the sheets of rain. Standing 6 feet away from the driver's side door, half sheltered by the canopy of a weeping willow but still getting pummeled by wind, was a woman. She wore a charcoal-tailored trench coat and black heels that had already sunk 2 inches into the shoulder mud. She was holding a gleaming iPhone skyward, stepping backward towards the highway lane in a desperate attempt to catch a cell signal beneath the rock ridge. Garrett didn't hesitate. You don't leave a driver stranded on the 9W corridor during a flash flood, especially not one standing 3 feet from traffic traveling at 50 miles an hour in zero visibility. He pulled his F-150 onto the shoulder 50 yards ahead of the luxury sports car, engaged his hazard lights, and reached behind the passenger seat for his heavy-duty yellow rain slicker and his portable diagnostic toolbox. When Garrett slammed his truck door and stepped into the storm, the rain hit him like cold needles. He walked toward the Aston Martin, his work boots crunching over wet gravel. The woman spun around at the sound of his approach. Even through the sheets of rain, Garrett could see the sudden panic in her sharp hazel eyes. She clutched her phone to her chest, her knuckles turning white, taking a defensive step back toward the driver's door. Her dark hair was plastered against her cheekbones, but despite the mascara smudging faintly beneath her eyes, she possessed an intimidating, razor-sharp posture. "Stay back!" she yelled over the roar of wind through the trees. "Roadside assistance is already dispatching an emergency tow from Newburgh." Garrett stopped 6 feet away, keeping his hands visible at his sides. "No, they aren't, lady. You're in the Storm King dead zone. You don't have 1 bar of cellular service here, and Newburgh Towing doesn't run flatbeds down this pass when the flood warnings go up." She looked down at her screen, cursing under her breath. "That's ridiculous. I have corporate priority satellite routing." "You have a metal box on a wet rock," Garrett interrupted, his deep voice carrying easily through the storm. "I'm Garrett. I run a restoration shop down in Beacon. If you keep standing near the fog line, a semi-truck is going to clip you. Get inside my cab where it's dry, or hold my flashlight so I can see why a $250,000 British engine is boiling over in 40-degree weather." Vanessa Adler stared at the tall man in the yellow slicker. For the past 18 months, since taking Adler Logistics and Tech public on the NASDAQ, every man she encountered had approached her with either rehearsed deference or predatory financial intent. This man was looking at her designer trench coat and muddy Christian Louboutin heels with sheer, unfiltered exasperation. "I don't need charity," she said, though a shiver rattled her shoulders. "And I certainly don't need a stranger touching my engine." "Right now you need a heater and a tow strap," Garrett countered, stepping past her toward the Aston Martin's front grille. "Pop the hood release under the dash, unless you want to spend the next 2 hours waiting for the state troopers to find you by accident." Vanessa hesitated for 2 heartbeats, her jaw tightening. Then, with a sharp nod, she opened her car door, reached down, and pulled the mechanical release lever. Garrett lifted the heavy aluminum hood. A cloud of sweet-smelling, toxic white steam billowed into the rain. He clicked on his industrial-grade LED flashlight, sweeping the beam over the massive twin-turbo V12 engine bay. "Well?" Vanessa asked, appearing at his elbow. She had refused his truck cab, choosing instead to hold her purse over her head like a useless shield. "Your upper coolant bypass hose blew," Garrett said, pointing the light beam at a ragged 2-inch split near the thermostat housing. "Green antifreeze all over the alternator housing. Engine overheated because the system lost pressure. Did your temperature gauge spike?" "A warning light flashed 3 miles back, but I had an executive board briefing playing over the audio system," Vanessa said defensively, wiping rain from her forehead. "I assumed it was a sensor malfunction." Garrett let out a dry, humorless chuckle that made her eyes narrow. "Of course you did. Why pull over when the computer tells you your engine is melting when you've got a conference call to finish?" "Excuse me?" Vanessa stepped closer, ignoring the mud ruined on her shoes. "I didn't ask for a lecture on vehicular maintenance from a passing motorist." "Good, because I don't charge for advice," Garrett said. He unlatched his metal toolbox. "You can't drive this, not even a mile. The heads will warp, and your $20,000 engine block will turn into a paperweight." "Then fix it," she demanded, her voice carrying the practiced authority of a CEO who managed 500 engineers. "I'll write you a check right now. $500 for a temporary patch that gets me 10 miles up the road." Garrett froze, his hand wrapped around a roll of self-fusing silicone repair tape. He turned his head slowly, letting the flashlight beam drop to her boots before rising to meet her gaze. "Keep your checkbook in your purse, lady," he said quietly, his tone dropping an octave below the wind. I don't fix cars because rich people throw bills at me. I'm fixing this because leaving anyone on the side of Route 9W in a flash flood is a death sentence. Now hold this light steady on the intake manifold or get out of my way. Vanessa blinked, stunned. She took the heavy aluminum flashlight from his gloved hand. For the next 12 minutes, she stood silently in the freezing rain, watching Garrett Miller work. He didn't fumble. His hands moved inside the cramped, boiling engine bay with surgical precision. He used a rag to wipe away the scalding coolant, wrapped the split hose in thick, overlapping layers of industrial silicone tape, and secured the repair with 2 heavy-duty stainless steel hose clamps from his kit. He worked with a calm, rhythmic efficiency that felt entirely alien to the chaotic corporate boardroom battles she had spent her week fighting. "Where are you headed in such a rush anyway?" Garrett asked, as he tightened the second clamp with a nut driver. "Bit far south for the weekend estate crowd." Vanessa let out a bitter sigh, adjusting the flashlight angle. "To a restaurant in Cold Spring. I'm being subjected to a blind date arranged by my executive coach. Apparently my life is too sterile, and I need to meet a grounded, practical man who doesn't work in private equity." Garrett paused, the nut driver slipping slightly on the clamp head. A strange, cold prickle ran down the back of his neck, completely unrelated to the rain sliding down his collar. "A blind date?" Garrett asked carefully, keeping his eyes fixed on the hose patch. "Yes," Vanessa said, rolling her eyes towards the dark canopy of trees. "Some small-town guy from Dutchess County. A single father, apparently. Chloe swears he's charming, but I already know how tonight goes. He'll spend 45 minutes talking about local property taxes or high school football. He'll feel intimidated the moment he realizes what my company actually does, and I'll end up paying the check out of awkward pity before driving back to the city alone." Garrett's jaw set like granite. He tightened the hose clamp until the metal bit into the rubber sleeve. "Is that right?" he asked, his voice deceptively flat. "It's a statistical probability," Vanessa replied, entirely oblivious to the man beneath the hood. "Men like that? They don't want a partner. They want a caretaker for their kids or an audience for their egos. I only agreed to go because Chloe threatened to resign if I didn't take one evening off." Garrett slowly pulled his hands out of the engine bay. He wiped his palms on a clean rag, took a jug of distilled water from his toolbox, and topped off her expansion tank. He screwed the cap back on with a decisive click. "Lower the hood," Garrett said. Vanessa handed him back the flashlight and pushed the hood down until it latched. She looked at him, her hazel eyes softening slightly as she took in his dripping, wet hair and the grease smudged along his jawline. "Thank you," she said, her tone genuinely softening for the first time. "I know I was abrasive when you pulled up. I've had a brutal week, handling a hostile shareholder vote. Truly, let me compensate you for your time and the parts." She reached into her leather trenchcoat pocket for her wallet. "Put it away," Garrett said, grabbing his toolbox. "The patch holds under 15 pounds of pressure. Keep your speed under 40. Keep your heater blasted on high to draw heat off the engine, and don't stop until you hit the gas station at the Cold Spring exit. Tell the attendant you need a real replacement hose ordered. At least tell me your full name," she insisted, taking a step toward his truck. "I'd like to send a gift basket to your shop, or leave a 5-star review." Garrett opened the door of his F-150. He looked down at her, at the soaked, shivering, breathtakingly arrogant woman who had just diagnosed his entire existence as a pathetic statistical probability. "Save your pity for your date, lady," Garrett said, swinging himself into the cab. "Sounds like he's going to need a stiff drink." Before she could answer, Garrett slammed the door, shifted into gear, and sprayed gravel into the rain as he pulled back onto Route 9W. 25 minutes later, Garrett stood in the restroom of the Gilded Elm, stripping off his wet yellow slicker and wiping the rainwater from his face with a stiff paper towel. The restaurant was a sensory assault of Edison bulbs, reclaimed barn wood, and low, ambient jazz. The air smelled of roasted garlic, truffle oil, and old money. Garrett checked his reflection in the mirror above the copper sink. His dark hair was still damp, pushed back carelessly from his forehead. His navy blazer had survived the storm relatively unscathed beneath the slicker, but there was a faint smear of engine grease on the knuckle of his right thumb that no amount of scrubbing with citrus soap could lift. He stared at that grease stain for a long moment. "He'll feel intimidated the moment he realizes what my company actually does." Her voice echoed in his ears, sharp and dismissive above the howling wind. Garrett let out a low, breathy laugh that held no joy. What were the odds? Out of all the stranded motorists on Route 9W, out of all the blind dates scheduled in the Hudson Valley on a rainy Saturday night, he had spent 12 minutes playing mechanic to Vanessa Adler. He considered walking out. He could get back in his truck, drive home to Beacon, pay Mrs. Higgins double for her time, and spend the rest of the evening eating macaroni and cheese with Lily while watching animated movies. It would be safe. It would preserve his dignity. Then his phone buzzed in his pocket. A text from his sister, Brenna. "She just texted Chloe. Her car broke down, but she's 10 mins away. Do not leave. Be a gentleman, Garrett Miller. I mean it." Garrett pocketed the phone, straightened his collar, and walked out into the dining room. "Miller party of 2, Garrett said to the hostess, a young woman holding an iPad. "Ah, yes, Mr. Miller. Your table is ready, by the fireplace." He followed her through the maze of white linen tablecloths and low-backed leather chairs. He ordered a bourbon neat from the waiter immediately upon sitting down, draining half of the glass before the ice could even melt. He checked his watch. 7:15 p.m. 10 minutes later, the heavy oak front doors of the Gilded Elm swung open. Garrett watched from his corner booth as Vanessa walked into the foyer. She had shed the mud-splattered trench coat, revealing a sophisticated, emerald-green silk midi dress that clung to her frame with understated elegance. Her hair had been smoothed down into a sleek, damp wave over one shoulder. She looked regal, composed, and utterly out of place in a town where half the population owned snowplows. The hostess greeted her, checked the iPad, and gestured toward the back of the dining room. Garrett didn't move. He rested his forearms on the white tablecloth, his hands loosely clasped, watching her approach. Vanessa walked behind the hostess, checking her reflection briefly in a darkened window pane. As they reached the fireplace section, her gaze swept across the tables, searching for the hesitant, uncomfortable small-town father Chloe had described. Her eyes landed on Garrett. She stopped 3 feet from the table. The hostess smiled brightly. "Here we are. Ms. Adler, this is Mr. Miller. Your server will be right back with the wine list." The hostess retreated, leaving a silence between them so profound it seemed to drown out the crackling birch wood in the hearth. Vanessa's hazel eyes widened, tracing the line of Garrett's jaw, the broad shoulders beneath the navy blazer, and finally dropping to the faint, dark stain of coolant and grease on his right thumb. Her lips parted slightly, her breath catching in her throat. "You," she whispered, the syllable bare and stripped of all corporate armor. "Evening, Vanessa," Garrett said smoothly, not rising from his chair. He gestured to the empty seat across from him, with a slight tilt of his bourbon glass. "How's the temperature gauge holding up?" Vanessa stood frozen on the Persian rug. The color drained from her cheeks before rushing back in a furious crimson tide that heated her ears. The memory of what she had said to him, on the side of the highway, every condescending word about single fathers, property taxes, and paying the check out of pity, slammed into her with the force of a freight train. You knew," she stammered, resting one hand on the back of the leather chair to steady herself. "When you fixed the hose, you knew who I was. I figured it out about halfway through your speech regarding my statistical probability of being a loser," Garrett said calmly. He leaned back, his gaze steady and unforgiving. "Please, sit down, unless you need to get back to your shareholders." Vanessa slowly pulled the chair out and sank into it. For the first time in her professional life, Vanessa Adler, the woman who routinely negotiated 9-figure contracts without blinking, was completely and utterly speechless. A young waiter in a crisp white apron appeared at the table, oblivious to the suffocating tension hovering over the linen tablecloth. He placed 2 leather-bound menus down with a flourish. "Good evening. My name is David, and I'll be taking care of you tonight. Our chef's specials include a pan-seared branzino with Meyer lemon risotto and a dry-aged bone-in ribeye served with black truffle bone marrow butter. Can I start you off with a bottle of sparkling water or a craft cocktail?" Garrett looked from the waiter to Vanessa, whose knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of the table. "Just tap water for now, David, and give us 10 minutes, please." "Of course, sir." The waiter vanished into the low-lit hum of the dining room. Vanessa stared at the flickering candle in the center of the table. The silence felt heavier than the storm outside. When she finally raised her head, her hazel eyes were stripped of their usual calculating sharpness, replaced by a raw, uncomfortable vulnerability. "I don't know how to begin to apologize," she said, her voice barely rising above the crackle of the hearth. "What I said on the highway, it was inexcusable. It was arrogant, presumptive, and rude." Garrett picked up his bourbon glass, swirling the amber liquid over the melting ice cube. "It was honest, Vanessa. That's the thing about strangers on dark roads. People say what they actually think because they assume there won't be any consequences. It wasn't about you," she said quickly, leaning forward across the table. "You have to believe me. I had just spent 3 hours in the back of a car fighting off a proxy contest from an activist investment firm that wants to liquidate my supply chain software divisions and lay off 400 people I hired personally. My head was spinning. I took out my exhaustion on a hypothetical construct my friend forced me to meet. A hypothetical construct who spends his evenings talking about property taxes and high school football." Garrett raised an eyebrow, taking a slow sip of his bourbon. "Tell me something. If my name had been Garrett Miller, managing partner at Goldman Sachs, stranded in a broken-down Porsche, would you have assumed I wanted a caretaker for my ego?" Vanessa winced. The directness of his question left her no room for corporate PR maneuvers. She drew a slow, stabilizing breath. "No," she admitted softly. "I probably would have assumed you were arrogant and ruthless, but I wouldn't have patronized you. I'm sorry, Garrett. Truly. You saved my engine and potentially saved me from a collision out there on Route 9W. And I repaid you by acting like an elitist snob." Garrett studied her face for several seconds. He saw the genuine remorse etched around her mouth, the slight tremor in her hands as she unfolded her linen napkin. Despite the defensive walls she built around herself, she wasn't completely hollow. "Apology accepted," Garrett said, his tone softening just a fraction. "Now pick up your menu. My sister Brenna will never forgive me if I let a billionaire go hungry on my watch." A fragile, self-deprecating smile touched Vanessa's lips. She opened the menu, though her eyes barely registered the entrees. "Why didn't you tell me? Right then, when I was standing under the willow tree complaining about the blind date. Why didn't you just say, 'I'm the guy'?" "Because I wanted to see who you really were when you weren't performing," Garrett replied smoothly. "In my line of work, people bring me classic cars they've spent thousands of dollars detailing on the outside. Fresh paint, polished chrome, imported Italian leather seats. But until you get under the chassis and look at the frame rails, you don't know if the car is actually solid or just rust held together by Bondo and ego. I wanted to look at the chassis." Vanessa set her menu down, genuinely intrigued. "And what did you find under the chassis, Mr. Miller?" "Someone who's running her engine at redline without any coolant," Garrett said plainly. "You're stressed to the point of structural failure, Vanessa. You carry your company like a lead weight around your neck, and you treat every interaction like a hostile merger. Must be exhausting." Before Vanessa could process the uncanny accuracy of his assessment, her purse vibrated against the floorboards, a sharp, rhythmic buzz that signaled a priority alert. She instinctively reached down, pulled out her phone, and glanced at the screen. Garrett watched her face transform in a fraction of a second. The soft apology vanished. Her jaw locked, her pupils dilated, and her posture stiffened into steel. "Bad news?" Garrett asked. "My chief financial officer," Vanessa said, her voice dropping into a flat, professional register. "Richard Harrison, The activist investor I mentioned just filed an emergency injunction in Delaware Chancery Court to block our Q4 acquisition of an automated robotics facility in Newark. He's claiming fiduciary negligence because our stock dipped 4% last Tuesday. She began typing furiously with one thumb, her knuckles whitening again. If he gets the injunction approved before Monday morning, our credit facility gets frozen. I need to call my legal team. She started to push her chair back, fully prepared to abandon the restaurant, the date, and the man across from her to dive back into the corporate war zone. "Put the phone on the table, Vanessa," Garrett said quietly. She froze, half standing, staring at him as if he had spoken in a foreign language. "Garrett, you don't understand. This involves $75 million in liquid equity. I understand that your lawyers charge $900 an hour to handle emergency injunctions on Saturday nights." Garrett interrupted, his voice steady, anchored, and completely free of intimidation. "And I understand that you staring at a 6-inch screen while pacing around a rain-soaked restaurant parking lot isn't going to change a judge's schedule in Delaware between now and 9 o'clock tomorrow morning." Vanessa hovered over her chair, torn between her ingrained Pavlovian response to corporate crises and the immovable, grounded calm emanating from the man across from her. "Eat dinner," Garrett instructed gently, gesturing to her seat. "Drink a glass of wine. Let your lawyers earn their retainers. If the world is going to end on Monday morning, you might as well face it with a decent ribeye in your stomach." For a long, agonizing moment, Vanessa hesitated. Then, with a slow, shaky exhale, she slid her phone onto the center of the tablecloth, face down, and sat back down. "You're very bossy for a small-town mechanic," she murmured, picking up her water glass. "I'm a single father of a 6-year-old girl," Garrett replied with a smirk. "Negotiating with stubborn, irrational people who refuse to take naps or eat their vegetables is my primary area of expertise." By 9 p.m., the atmosphere at the table had shifted entirely. Once Vanessa let go of her corporate lifeline, the armor dissolved. They had ordered the ribeye to share, paired with a robust Napa Valley Cabernet that Garrett had selected with surprisingly sophisticated knowledge. A holdover, he explained, from his years entertaining aerospace defense contractors in Connecticut. "So let me get this straight," Vanessa said, leaning her chin on her hand, her eyes shining with genuine fascination. "You held a master machinist certification. You were managing a 40-man precision engineering floor producing turbined tolerances for military drones, and you walked away from a 6-figure salary to fix 30-year-old muscle cars in a brick shed?" "It's an 8,000-square-foot climate-controlled facility, not a brick shed," Garrett corrected with a grin. "And yes, when Sarah decided that motherhood interfered with her lifestyle photography aspirations in Los Angeles, she left Lily with me. She was 18 months old." Garrett's expression sobered, his thumb tracing the rim of his wine glass. "You can't work 80-hour weeks, fly to Seattle for defense expos on 12 hours notice, and manage 60-hour factory shifts when you're the sole caregiver for a toddler who wakes up at 3 in the morning with earaches. The corporate grind asks for your soul, Vanessa. It demands your family as collateral. I decided Lily was worth more than a corner office and a pension fund." Vanessa felt a sudden sharp ache in her chest. She looked at Garrett, his broad shoulders, his calm confidence, his complete absence of professional insecurities, and realized how profoundly wrong her assumptions had been. He hadn't failed to reach her level of success. He had looked at the summit of the corporate mountain, decided the air was too thin, and the view wasn't worth the sacrifice, and climbed down on his own terms. "That takes an incredible amount of courage," Vanessa said softly. "Most men I know would have hired 3 nannies and kept climbing." "Most men you know measure their worth by the balance sheets they control," Garrett said bluntly. "I measure mine by whether Lily smiles when I pick her up from kindergarten." The waiter arrived with the leather checkbook, placing it delicately between them. Vanessa instantly reached her hand toward her purse. "Let me take this. Please. Consider it a late payment for the coolant hose." Garrett's hand moved faster. His large, calloused palm clamped down on the leather booklet before her fingers could touch it. He slid it effortlessly across the linen to his side of the table. "Not a chance," Garrett said, pulling a sleek black card from his wallet. "You promised yourself earlier today that you'd pay the check out of awkward pity before driving back to the city alone. I'm not in the business of fulfilling your cynical prophecies." Vanessa felt a flush of warmth rise up her neck. She watched him sign the receipt with smooth, decisive strokes. There was no hesitation, no performative masculinity, just a man taking care of his table. They walked out together into the crisp Hudson Valley night. The rain had stopped, leaving the air smelling of clean pine, wet asphalt, and fallen oak leaves. The fog hung low around the base of Storm King Mountain across the river. They stepped onto the gravel shoulder where her Aston Martin was parked alongside his F-150. Vanessa pressed the unlock button on her key fob. The headlights flashed once, but the sound of the locks clicking open was weak, sluggish, and accompanied by a strange electrical clicking noise from under the dashboard. Vanessa frowned, opening the driver's door and pressing the ignition button. Click, 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 we're behind some. The dashboard screens flickered weakly, displaying a cascade of warning symbols. Transmission fault. Electrical system voltage low, engine management disabled. "What now?" Vanessa groaned, dropping her forehead against the leather steering wheel. "Did your patch fail?" Garrett walked over, leaning his forearms on the open driver's window frame. "Patch is holding fine, but when you drove through those standing drainage puddles on 9W with a ruptured coolant system, water got sprayed directly into your alternator assembly and shorted the voltage regulator. Your battery drained itself while we were eating steaks." "Can you jump-start it?" she asked desperately. "I can," Garrett said, "but your alternator isn't pushing current back into the battery. If I jump it, you'll get about 4 miles down the road before your fuel pumps die, and your headlights shut off at 60 miles an hour on a dark highway. You aren't driving back to Manhattan tonight, Vanessa." She stepped out of the car, looking around the darkened, tree-lined road. The isolation of the Hudson Valley suddenly felt immense and daunting. "I don't have a change of clothes. I don't know the hotels around here. I have an emergency legal briefing at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning." "First of all, breathe," Garrett said, pulling his phone out. "Second, the Hudson Valley Inn is 3 miles away down Main Street in Beacon. It's clean, owned by a friend of mine named Martha, and they have reliable fiber-optic Wi-Fi for your legal calls. I'll load your car onto my friend Jim's flatbed tow truck right now, store it inside my locked shop for the night, and drive you to the inn." Vanessa looked up at him. In the cool moonlight, stripped of her corporate authority and her transportation, she felt entirely dependent on a man she had insulted 3 hours earlier. "Why are you being so kind to me, Garrett?" she asked softly. "You have every reason to leave me to the tow companies and go home to your daughter." Garrett opened the passenger door of his F-150, gesturing for her to get in. "Because beneath all that razor-wire armor and corporate jargon," Garrett said, looking her dead in the eye, "I think you're just a woman who forgot what it feels like to have someone watch her back without sending an invoice. Now get in the truck, Vanessa. It's getting cold." Sunday morning broke bright and piercingly blue, the autumn sun illuminating the brilliant red and gold foliage along the Hudson River. At 9:30 a.m., Vanessa Adler stood outside the industrial steel garage doors of Miller Precision and Restoration on Wolcott Avenue in Beacon. She was wearing a gray Harvard Law sweatshirt and black yoga pants she had bought off the rack at a local pharmacy Martha had directed her to at 8 that morning. Her hair pulled back into a simple, practical ponytail. She pushed the side office door open. The shop didn't smell like a typical greasy garage. It smelled of citrus degreaser, polished leather, and hot coffee. In the center of the massive, surgically clean bay sat her Aston Martin DB11, already hooked to a diagnostic computer station. But what caught Vanessa's breath was the car sitting on the hydraulic lift next to it. A completely stripped-down Concours-quality 1963 Ferrari 250 GT Lusso. Garrett was standing beneath the Ferrari's elevated chassis, wearing clean denim jeans and a fitted gray t-shirt that highlighted the heavy definition of his arms and shoulders. He was pointing a digital torque wrench at a suspension assembly, while explaining something in a low, patient voice to a little girl sitting on a rolling shop stool nearby. "See this cotter pin, Lily?" Garrett said, tapping a tiny steel clip. "If we don't lock this through the castle nut, the vibration from the road over 500 miles will slowly back the nut off the spindle. Precision isn't about the big parts. It's about making sure the smallest pieces never fail. Because if the little pieces fail, the whole wheel falls off and the driver gets a boo-boo." Lily sagged wisely, clutching a sketch pad and a box of 64 crayons. "Exactly right, Bug," Garrett chuckled. He turned his head, catching sight of Vanessa standing by the doorway. "Morning," Garrett said, lowering the torque wrench. "Martha get you settled in all right?" "She was wonderful," Vanessa said, stepping onto the polished concrete floor. She felt acutely self-conscious in her oversized sweatshirt, a far cry from the silk midi dress of the previous night. "I hope I'm not interrupting your Sunday routine." "Not at all," Garrett said, walking over with a clean rag wiping his hands. "Vanessa, this is my daughter Lily. Lily, this is the lady whose car had the upset cooling system yesterday." Lily hopped off her stool, trotting over with her sketch pad held out. Her wide brown eyes assessed Vanessa with the brutal, honest scrutiny only a 6-year-old possesses. "Daddy said you drive a spaceship," Lily noted, pointing a yellow crayon toward the Aston Martin. Vanessa blinked, caught off guard, before letting out a genuine, unforced laugh that seemed to startle even her. She knelt down on the concrete, bringing herself to eye level with the child, ignoring how the floor might dust her new pants. "It looks like a spaceship sometimes," Vanessa confided, with a conspiratorial smile. "But yesterday it acted like a very grumpy tea kettle. Your daddy had to put a bandage on its pipe." "Daddy fixes everything," Lily stated, factually. She looked at Vanessa's plain gray sweatshirt. "You looked nicer today. Yesterday in the car, you looked like the mean lady from 101 Dalmatians." "Lily," Garrett warned, though he was hiding a grin behind his hand. "It's quite all right," Vanessa laughed, feeling a warmth in her chest she hadn't experienced in years. "She's entirely right. I felt like the mean lady yesterday." Before the conversation could continue, Vanessa's phone, clutched tightly in her palm, shattered the peaceful garage atmosphere with a shrill, escalating alarm. It wasn't a text. It was an urgent priority call from her general counsel, Arthur Vance. Vanessa stepped away toward the front office glass, hitting answer. "Arthur, tell me we have the Delaware response filed." "Vanessa, where the hell are you?" Arthur's voice boomed through the earpiece, frantic and trembling. "Turn on CNBC or Bloomberg right now. Richard Harrison didn't just file the injunction. He leaked a manufactured story to the press half an hour ago." Vanessa felt the blood freeze in her veins. "What story?" "Portfoy. He's claiming that due to erratic executive leadership and undisclosed personal crises, you've gone incommunicado during the Newark Robotics acquisition negotiations. He released drone photos of your car being towed away on a flatbed in upstate New York last night, claiming you were involved in an undisclosed accident and are medically unfit to lead the board meeting tomorrow morning." "That's slanderous absurdity," Vanessa hissed, pacing the length of the office window. "My car had a blown coolant hose. I'm standing in Beacon right now." "It doesn't matter what the truth is, Vanessa," Arthur shouted. "The Asian markets open in 4 hours, and our pre-market futures are already down 9%. Harrison has called an emergency quorum of the board of directors for 1 p.m. today via secure video conference. If you don't appear on that screen with a fully stabilized corporate environment, audited financial reassurances, and proof that the Newark acquisition logistics are locked down, the board is going to vote to suspend your operational authority pending a medical review." Vanessa gripped the edge of Garrett's metal desk so hard her wrist trembled. Her breathing turned shallow, rapid, and ragged. "Arthur, all my acquisition files, my encrypted security token for the board portal, and the logistical mapping hard drives are in my briefcase in the trunk of the Aston Martin. I can't drive back to the city by 1 o'clock. My car is dead." "Then find a car service, rent a helicopter, or steal a bicycle," Arthur yelled. If you aren't logged into that secure server by 1 p.m. with your full presentation ready, 10 years of your work gets handed to Richard Harrison on a silver platter." The line went dead. Vanessa dropped her phone onto the desk. The room began to spin. 10 years of 80-hour weeks. 10 years of sacrificed relationships. 10 years of building Adler Logistics from a 2-person startup in a Brooklyn garage into a multi-billion-dollar powerhouse. All of it slipping through her fingers because of a burst rubber hose and a calculated Sunday morning coup. She sank into Garrett's office chair, burying her face in her trembling hands. A single hot tear of pure frustration and helplessness escaped her eye, tracing down her cheek. The office door opened quietly. Garrett stepped inside, closing the door behind him to keep Lily out in the main shop bay. He walked over, leaning against the edge of the metal desk right next to her chair. "Talk to me," Garrett said simply. Vanessa looked up, her hazel eyes red-rimmed and panicked. "I'm ruined, Garrett. My rival orchestrated a board coup. They think I'm incapacitated up here. I have an emergency video conference at 1 o'clock that will determine the fate of my company, but the proprietary software and security tokens I need to run the presentation are tied to my car's internal mainframe and my hard drives in the trunk." She gestured wildly toward the shop bay. "Your diagnostic computer said the car's electrical system is completely locked down due to the voltage regulator fault. Without main battery power, the trunk electronic release won't even disengage, and my encrypted laptop won't interface with the onboard logistical server. I am literally trapped 3 hours away from saving my life's work." Garrett stood silent for a moment, looking through the glass at the sleek, dead British sports car sitting in his shop. His analytical mind, trained on thousands of complex mechanical and electrical puzzles, began dissecting her panic into solvable equations. "You don't need to be in Manhattan to run a video conference," Garrett said calmly. "You need high-speed fiber internet, clean power to your laptop, and access to your trunk." "Garrett, did you hear me?" Vanessa cried out. "The electronic release is dead. The car has no power." Garrett let out a dry, confident smile. He reached down, gently grasping her shoulder and squeezing it with reassuring strength. "Vanessa," he said smoothly, "you spent 10 years building a software empire, but you clearly don't know a damn thing about automotive engineering. Every luxury car on Earth has a mechanical emergency trunk release cable hidden behind the rear seat bolster in case of total electrical failure. And as for your onboard computer server," he pointed toward his industrial diagnostic workstation, which boasted triple 4K monitors and a heavy-duty uninterruptible power supply unit. "I have a 12-volt DC bench power converter capable of pushing 50 amps directly to your ECU bypass terminals, coupled with a gigabit fiber optic line I use to download ECU mapping files directly from Ferrari in Maranello." "You aren't stranded, lady. You're in a command bunker." Vanessa stared at him, her breath catching as the sheer realization washed over her. "Can you really bypass the voltage regulator and get my servers online by noon?" she whispered, her voice trembling with sudden, fierce hope. Garrett rolled up the sleeves of his gray t-shirt, revealing the clean, muscular forearms of a man who spent his life solving problems other people gave up on. "Give me 45 minutes and a cup of black coffee," Garrett said. "Let's go show your board of directors what happens when a billionaire CEO hires a real mechanic." The atmosphere inside Bay 3 of Miller, Precision and Restoration, transformed from a quiet Sunday garage into a high-stakes tactical operations center within 15 minutes. Garrett didn't waste time with guesswork. He retrieved a specialized plastic trim removal wedge from his roll-around tool chest and slid it effortlessly behind the rear leather bolster of the Aston Martin's cabin. With a flick of his wrist and a sharp, practiced pull, the panel unclipped, exposing a braided steel Bowden cable routed beneath the rear firewall. He gave it a firm tug. A heavy, mechanical clunk echoed through the shop as the clamshell trunk lid popped open, entirely independent of the dead electrical grid. "Step 1, Garrett said, lifting the carbon-fiber deck lid. "Get your gear." Vanessa scrambled to the rear of the vehicle, grabbing her ballistic nylon Toomey briefcase. Inside sat her primary workstation, a customized, encrypted Dell Precision mobile workstation, 2 physical biometric YubiKeys, and a high-speed external solid-state drive housing the raw telemetry mapping of Adler Logistics. Entire North American freight network. While she unpacked her equipment onto the stainless steel workbench beside his diagnostic rig, Garrett rolled over a heavy-duty Agilent laboratory-grade programmable DC power supply, a $6,000 unit he used to calibrate delicate vintage dashboard avionics. Your car's internal server racks operate on a closed-loop 12-volt architecture, but the fried voltage regulator in your engine bay created an open ground loop, Garrett explained, his hands flying as he stripped 2 heavy-gauge copper leads. If you plug your laptop into the car's standard diagnostic port right now, backfed static electricity will fry your motherboard before you can type your password. So how do we isolate the server? Vanessa asked, her hands hovering over her keyboard. Garrett reached under the Aston Martin's rear wheel well, pulling the primary fuse box cover off with a sharp snap. He bypassed the main vehicle harness entirely, clamping his direct-feed copper lead straight onto the CAN bus data gateway terminals. He dialed the Agilent power supply precisely to 13.8 volts and engaged the circuit breaker. The Aston Martin's rear glass antenna hummed softly. Inside the trunk, 3 hidden LED indicators blinked from amber to solid green. Data gateway is live, isolated from the engine grid, and pushing 0 electrical noise, Garrett announced, tossing her a high-speed, shielded OBD2 to RJ45 Ethernet adapter. Plug that into your LAN port. You're hardwired directly to the car's neural network, and my gigabit fiber line is running parallel through the diagnostic rig. You've got 40 gigabits of bandwidth and clean power. You are officially the most dangerous woman in Dutchess County. Vanessa plugged the cable into her laptop. Her screen flickered, instantly recognizing the onboard mainframe. Lines of green compilation code raced across her display as her proprietary logistical software synced with her corporate cloud servers in Manhattan. "Daddy, the lady's computer looks like the Matrix," Lily whispered from her stool, clutching her 64-pack of crayons to her chest. "She's building a fortress, Bug," Garrett said softly, walking over to hand Vanessa a steaming mug of black coffee. Vanessa took a sip, her hazel eyes locked onto the scrolling data streams. But as the diagnostic sweep completed, her fingers suddenly froze over the trackpad. Her breath hitched, catching sharply in her throat. "Garrett," she murmured, her voice dropping to a hollow, incredulous whisper. "Look at this." Garrett leaned over her shoulder, placing one hand on the stainless steel workbench to brace himself. He studied the complex matrix of routing charts and server latency logs illuminating the primary 4K monitor. "I'm looking at freight distribution corridors for the eastern seaboard," Garrett observed, tracing a jagged red line dipping sharply across the graph, "and a massive bottleneck occurring right around Tuesday afternoon. That bottleneck is why our stock dipped 4%, Vanessa said, her voice shaking, not with panic anymore, but with cold, escalating rage. Our automated dispatch algorithm suddenly rerouted 200 long-haul freight carriers away from our primary Midwest distribution hubs, causing 72 hours of cascading supply chain delays. Richard Harrison used that exact dip to justify filing his emergency injunction this morning." She clicked 3 times, opening a hidden forensic root access terminal that only 3 people in the company possessed access keys for. "Look at the routing override command," Vanessa said, pointing her manicured fingernail at a specific string of alphanumeric code stamped at 2:14 a.m. on Tuesday morning. That wasn't an algorithmic glitch. That was a manual override script executed from an internal administrative IP address. Garrett's eyes narrowed as he read the security certificate attached to the command line. IP address resolves to Executive Suite Level 42, Manhattan Headquarters. "Richard Harrison's private terminal," Vanessa breathed, looking up at Garrett with eyes that looked like shattered glass. He didn't just capitalize on a bad quarter. He engineered the system failure. He sabotaged our own clients' shipments, drove down the share price on purpose, and tracked my personal schedule to launch a board coup while I was out of cell coverage on a blind date. The sheer audacity of the betrayal hung heavy in the air of the garage. Vanessa's shoulders slumped, the weight of the corporate treachery threatening to crush what remained of her resolve. Then Garrett reached down, gently closing her fingers around the warm coffee mug. "In my shop," Garrett said, his deep voice slicing through her despair like a hot blade through wax. "When we find a rusted-out frame rail or a toxic leak, we don't sit on the floor and cry about the rust. We cut the rot out with a plasma cutter and weld in high-tensile steel." He tapped the corner of her primary monitor where the system clock read 12:48 p.m. 12 minutes until the emergency quorum. "You've got the server logs, you've got the IP routing receipts, and you've got 12 minutes to put your armor back on," Garrett said steadily. "Are you going to let some desk jockey steal the company you built, or are we going to light the cutting torch?" Vanessa looked from the forensic IP receipts on the screen to the reflection of herself in the darkened glass of the shop window. She was wearing a gray Harvard Law sweatshirt and borrowed sneakers, her hair pulled back in a simple elastic band. She didn't have her $2,000 designer suits, her corporate PR team, or her corner office. She turned back to Garrett, a slow, dangerous smile spreading across her face. "Hand me your headset, mechanic," Vanessa said. "It's time to cut out the rot." At precisely 1 p.m., the secure corporate boardroom channel went live on the center 4K diagnostic monitor of Miller Precision and Restoration. On the screen, 9 video tiles populated simultaneously. 8 of them showed older, stone-faced board members sitting in mahogany-paneled home offices across Westchester and Connecticut. The central tile showed the corporate boardroom at Adler Logistics, Manhattan headquarters. Sitting at the head of the conference table, flanked by 2 corporate litigators in charcoal suits, was Richard Harrison, his silver hair impeccably coiffed, a smug, predatory curve resting on his lips. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," Harrison began, his voice dripping with false gravity. "I call this emergency quorum of the board to order. As briefed, we are facing an unprecedented crisis of executive continuity. Ms. Adler has suffered a severe personal breakdown, vanishing into the upstate wilderness during critical acquisition negotiations, leaving our shareholders exposed to extreme fiduciary volatility." "I wouldn't start popping the vintage champagne just yet, Richard." Vanessa's voice rang out through the audio feed, clear, sharp, and razor cold. Harrison abruptly stopped mid-sentence. Every board member on the conference feed blinked as tile number 10 activated. Instead of a frantic, disheveled CEO broadcasting from a grainy cell phone in a ditch, the board was confronted with a stunningly crisp, broadcast-quality 4K feed. Vanessa sat upright in Garrett's leather executive chair, framed by the pristine, high-tech industrial architecture of the restoration shop. Behind her, the gleaming chrome engine stacks of the vintage Ferrari caught the overhead studio lights, exuding an atmosphere of absolute precision, dominance, and control. "Vanessa!" Harrison recovered quickly, his face darkening. "Where the hell are you? You missed the morning legal prep, your vehicle was spotted on a flatbed tow truck, and our stock is hemorrhaging. Chairman Kincaid, I move that we immediately suspend her operational oversight." "Shut up, Richard," Vanessa said calmly, adjusting the boom microphone above her desk. "Chairman Kincaid, members of the board, I apologize for taking this call from my upstate engineering and logistical facility in Beacon, but last night my vehicle suffered a mechanical failure on Route 9W. "An engineering facility?" Harrison scoffed, leaning toward his conference microphone. "Look at her background. She's sitting in a greasy auto repair shop. She's lying to the board to cover up her erratic, negligent absence during the Newark Robotics acquisition." "Speaking of negligence," Vanessa cut in smoothly, her fingers dancing across the trackpad, "let's discuss the 4% share price drop that occurred last Tuesday, the exact drop Richard cited in his emergency Delaware Chancery Court filing this morning." With a single keystroke, Vanessa bypassed the board's visual tiles, forcing a high-definition screen share across every monitor linked to the secure conference. Instantly, the forensic IP routing map materialized in front of the board of directors. What is this? Chairman Kincaid asked, leaning close to his screen in Greenwich, Connecticut. Vanessa, what are we looking at? You're looking at our core automated routing dispatch logs for the Midwest Freight Corridor, Robert, Vanessa explained, her voice carrying the absolute authority of a founder defending her empire. Specifically, an unauthorized administrative override executed at 2:14 a.m. on Tuesday. This override artificially delayed 200 automated carriers, creating the exact supply chain bottleneck that drove our share price down 4%. Harrison's face drained of color. He stood up from the conference table in Manhattan, slamming his palm onto the polished wood. This is a fabricated diversion. She's projecting doctored data from an unverified server to distract from her physical abandonment of her post. It isn't doctored, and it isn't unverified, Vanessa countered instantly. She clicked a second file, dropping an encrypted packet directly into the board's chat portal. I have just distributed the digital signature and security certificates attached to that routing override. The command was executed using an executive level 3 encryption key assigned to IP address 10.42. Ort Botan. 29. Silence fell over the digital conference line. That IP address belongs to Richard Harrison's private office suite, Chairman Kincaid said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, icy baritone. That's impossible, Harrison shouted, looking frantically at his two litigators, who were suddenly inching their chairs away from him. Her car's computer system was completely fried by an electrical short. She doesn't have access to the root servers. Who processed that data? She's running an unauthorized third-party breach of our corporate mainframe from a backwoods garage. Before Vanessa could answer, a large hand reached over, gently adjusting the camera angle to widen the frame. Garrett stepped into the visual feed, standing casually beside Vanessa's chair. With his broad shoulders, clean denim, and calm, commanding demeanor, he looked less like a small-town mechanic and more like a private security consultant. The data wasn't breached, Mr. Harrison, Garrett said, his deep voice resonating effortlessly through the boardroom speakers. My name is Garrett Miller, former senior precision aerospace machinist and data security compliance officer for defense contracts, currently operating Miller Precision and Restoration. I hardwired Ms. Adler's onboard encrypted server directly through my shop's isolated optical network, using a regulated DC bench supply to prevent data corruption. Garrett leaned down slightly, looking dead into Harrison's camera tile. And for your lawyer's information, Garrett continued coldly, every packet captured on this network bears an immutable timestamp verified against Department of Defense atomic clocks. Try to subpoena it, try to claim it's fabricated, and I will personally walk the physical hard drives down to the SEC Enforcement Office in Lower Manhattan tomorrow morning. Harrison collapsed back into his leather conference chair, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly. His lead litigator quietly reached out and closed his briefcase with a definitive snap. Chairman Kincaid took a deep, audible breath through his microphone. Richard, Chairman Kincaid said firmly, turn in your security credentials and your corporate laptop to HR immediately. You are hereby suspended from the board of directors pending a full federal forensic audit and an immediate SEC referral for securities fraud and corporate sabotage. Kincaid turned his gaze back to Vanessa's tile, his expression softening into profound respect. Vanessa, as for the Newark Robotics acquisition, what is our status? Vanessa smiled, resting her hands flat on the stainless steel desk. The acquisition paperwork was finalized and locked into my onboard server at 5 p.m. yesterday, Robert. Funding is secured, and the integration timeline begins Wednesday morning. I'll see you all in the office on Tuesday. I'm taking the rest of my Sunday off. Understood, Ms. Adler. Meeting adjourned. The video tiles winked out one by one until the 4K monitor went completely dark, reflecting only the quiet, sunlit interior of the Beacon garage. For 3 full minutes after the connection terminated, Vanessa didn't move. She sat in the office chair, staring at the blank screen, listening to the slow, steady hum of the Agilent power supply and the distant chirping of birds outside the garage bay doors. 10 years of corporate warfare. 10 years of paranoia, stress, and sleeping with one eye open. It had all culminated in a 20-minute digital firefight inside a classic car workshop. And she had won. A tiny pair of hands suddenly placed a piece of white sketch paper onto the desk beside her keyboard. Vanessa turned her head. Lily was standing beside her, looking up with wide, serious brown eyes. On the paper was a drawing done in vibrant yellow, red, and blue crayons. It depicted a silver car with rocket fins flying over a dark blue river, piloted by a stick figure with long, dark hair and a massive, triumphant grin. "That's your spaceship," Lily explained proudly, pointing a finger at the crayon exhaust flames. "Daddy fixed the pipe so it flies again, and you made the mean, screaming man on the TV go away." Vanessa felt a sudden, overwhelming tightness in her throat. The rigid steel plates wrapping around her chest, the protective armor she had worn every day since her late 20s, cracked wide open. She picked up the drawing, her fingers trembling slightly, and looked from the paper to the little girl, and finally up to Garrett. "Thank you, Lily," Vanessa whispered, her voice husky with genuine emotion. This is the best corporate report I've ever received. I'm going to frame it." Lily beamed, skipping back over to her rolling stool to organize her crayon box. Garrett walked over, leaning against the edge of the desk. He turned off the DC bench supply, silencing the hum of the electrical equipment. He looked down at Vanessa, his eyes warm, searching, and entirely devoid of the intimidation or reverence she usually encountered from men. "How does the engine feel?" Garrett asked softly. Vanessa leaned back in the chair, letting out a long, shuddering exhale that seemed to drain 10 years of accumulated exhaustion from her bones. She looked at her hands. No designer watch, no diamond cuffs, just a woman in a gray sweatshirt who had survived the fire. "Light," she admitted, looking up into his steady eyes. "For the first time since I went public. I feel completely light." She stood up, stepping close enough to him that she could smell the subtle scent of pine soap and clean machine oil on his shirt. "Garrett," she said earnestly, "what you did today? Saving my car on Route 9W, giving me sanctuary here, backing me up against Harrison. I can't just write you a check for this. Name your price. A corporate retainer, an equity partnership in our logistics fleet, a new commercial building for your shop, anything." Garrett shook his head slowly, a gentle, knowing smile touching his lips. He reached out, his rough, calloused thumb softly brushing a stray lock of dark hair away from her forehead. "You still don't get it, do you, lady?" Garrett murmured. "I told you yesterday. I don't fix things because rich people throw money at me. I fixed your engine because you were stranded. I fixed your board presentation because bull-headed bullies like Harrison need to be put in their place." He let his hand drop to his side, stepping back to give her space. "Your Aston Martin has a brand-new silicone-reinforced coolant hose installed," Garrett said, pointing toward the bay doors. "System holds 20 pounds of pressure without a drop of leakage. The battery is fully charged, and Jim's flatbed dropped it off the lift an hour ago. You're free to drive back to your glass tower in Manhattan whenever you're ready." Vanessa looked at the silver sports car gleamed under the shop lights. She looked out the window toward the winding asphalt of Route 9W, leading south toward the dense, suffocating concrete canyon of New York City. Then she turned back to Garrett Miller, the single father who had looked beneath her polished surface, identified every broken weld in her life, and helped her rebuild her chassis from the inside out. She walked over to her nylon briefcase, picked up her phone, and powered it off. The screen went completely black. She dropped it into her bag and zipped it shut. "My first integration meeting with the Newark robotics team isn't until Tuesday morning," Vanessa said quietly, her hazel eyes locking onto his with unwavering clarity. "And I believe your sister Brenna mentioned something about us balancing each other out." Garrett raised an eyebrow, a slow, genuine grin lighting up his face. "Is that right?" "Yes," Vanessa said, taking a step toward him. "I owe you a date, Mr. Miller, a real one. No corporate mergers, no proxy battles, no blind date performance art. Just a man who restores classic engines and a woman who really needs to learn how to change her own oil." Garrett chuckled, extending his arm toward the office door. Well, Mrs. Higgins is baking apple crisp 3 doors down, and Lily needs someone to help her color inside the lines. Think you can handle Dutchess County pacing on a Sunday afternoon? Vanessa smiled, the brightest, most authentic smile she had worn in a decade. Try me, she said. Sometimes the breakdown we dread the most is the exact detour we need to fix what is broken under the hood. Garrett and Vanessa's story proves that real strength isn't found in a billionaire's bank account or a polished corporate resume. It's found in the willingness to stop on a dark, rain-soaked road, lift the hood, and look beneath the surface. If this story reminded you never to judge a person by their cover or their job title, hit that like button right now. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that true connection happens when we drop our armor, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell for more real-life drama, unexpected twists, and unforgettable stories delivered every single week.